Hello and welcome to Conversations That Connect. We are your hosts Suki and Taylor.
Join us as we explore the IT, digital, accounting and finance recruitment industry and dive into the factors shaping our careers and life.
Get ready for engaging discussions that bridge work, life and really everything in between.
Grab your headphones, sit back and let's explore the connections that drive success. Yeah, we thought that we would run over a few things all to do with interviewing, like how to structure an interview, what's the difference between behavioural and technical questions, common interview mistakes, that sort of vibe for today.
Yep. And there's probably there's always two angles that we can take from it. The client side, when you're actually conducting the interview and organizing the interview, and then the candidate side, who's on the receiving end of getting the information, obviously preparing for the interview. We just briefly this morning, Taylor and I spoke about the interview process and when it actually starts. And in our opinion, the interview process starts probably the day you put up an ad as a client, your talent department, or you as the hiring manager putting up an ad on Seek or on your website. That creates an expectation, a feeling with the candidate going, yes, I'd like to apply for this position. And that's where it starts for the candidate.
Yeah, it sets the scene.
Correct. They're judging, making decisions based on the ad and applying for it, but then also how are they treated throughout the whole interview process. So I don't know if people actually think about that, but that's where it starts.
Yeah. 100%.
And from a client perspective, very important, like you said this morning, Taylor, it's that social contract.
Yeah.
That you're closing a contract with a candidate before anything has really happened.
Yeah.
And I've seen candidates decide to take a role or not take a role based on their experience, not just in the interview, but setting up interviews, getting feedback. Was everybody in the meeting room that needed to be there or that was supposed to be there? Were they late?
Yeah. What was the tone of the interview? What was the attitude? Yeah. But also on the flip side of that, in terms of like candidates, the interview process starts when you apply for that job as well.
Correct.
So when I'm reading a resume, that's kind of like, okay, you can talk the talk, but then the interview process is, can you walk the walk?
Walk the walk. Yep.
Yeah. So it's very much the same. Like client side, it's when you put the ad up. Candidate side, it's as soon as you apply for that job. Because again, you're setting the scene and you're setting the personality behind it, I guess. You're setting that brand. So it does work both ways with that. And it does start very, very soon in the process.
So it's right in the beginning, 100%.
Yeah.
And then I think it just builds from there. If you're a candidate that's suitable for a role, most organizations will shortlist candidates based on the application, which is where your resume has to do the talking for you. And we've spoken about tailoring your resume and making sure that your LinkedIn profile references the same as what's in your resume. And then from the shortlisting, clients will more than likely give you a quick call just to run through the details, make sure what they're reading in your resume is actually what they're looking for. And that would usually be the talent person if it's a bigger organization. In that process, if I talk about the client side, a small little thing like sending an email to the candidate saying, thank you for your response. I would love to have a bit more of a detailed conversation. Are you available these times and these dates? We've had clients just say, are you available this week? And then a candidate comes back and says, yes, I'm available at 3:00 on Wednesday. And then they're like, oh, sorry, no, we're not available at 3:00 on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Can you do Thursday? Yes, I can do Thursday at 11. Oh, actually, Thursday at 11 doesn't. So it's going back with specific dates and times that you would be able to ring the candidate and then ring the candidate at that time.
Yeah.
And candidates answer your phone at
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah. If you've scheduled in something and you don't answer, it immediately rings red flags.
Yeah.
Especially, it happens a lot. And I understand, like, if you're stuck in a meeting and things like that, but if you don't get back to them, like, I had a candidate, we scheduled in a 3:00 phone call for a job. I didn't hear back from this candidate until after 6:00 that night. It was a text saying, "Hey, sorry, we're stuck in a meeting." That was 3 hours after our scheduled call. So for me, I'm like, that's 3 hours.
Yep. So
That's a
immediately
long
you're
time.
thinking, it's a long time, and immediately you're thinking, even if you're suitable for this role, you're not instilling confidence in me that if a
You'll show
client
up on
says you have
time.
to be in a meeting at 11 and you can't make it, that firstly, that you will make it, and secondly, if you can't make it, that you will actually let us all know.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that's the social contract
Yeah.
that you're stepping into, is if you're not communicating and if your actions speak louder than words,
Yeah.
unless you let people know and just be respectful of everybody's time.
Yeah.
And that goes vice
Both
versa. We've
ways.
had clients that
Yep.
the hiring manager rang in sick in the morning,
Yep.
and they'd let us know, and we can reschedule
Yep.
the catch up for candidates. I think people have become a little bit relaxed because it's online and you're not traveling into the city or you're not traveling to the offices. That shouldn't make a difference.
No.
You're still preparing, you're still getting ready, you're still making sure that you're presentable and that you've done your homework for the time that was scheduled, on both sides.
And that you show up professionally as well. Like,
100%.
we've all seen the TikToks and everything like that. I don't care what you're wearing underneath, but this top half, like, you could be in your pajamas, but you still need to show up looking professional.
Correct. Yes, correct.
And that sets the tone for the whole thing.
100%. Make
Yeah.
sure everything works.
Yeah.
That you've got a connection. And we also always share a candidate. It's not just their email address. We share their mobile numbers just in case there is something that happens and the client needs to call them to say, hey, let's do a phone interview. We're struggling with our internet connection. And from a candidate side, we're always there that they can ring us and go, I haven't been admitted to from the waiting room into the meeting. There's what's wrong, that we can follow up with them.
100%.
Yeah, and then once you're in the interview, most interviews that our candidates are part of are a bit of a combination. It's a technical interview. Technical meaning, the technical guys, the developers, but if you're a project manager or a BA, it's those more technical, tell me what you've done, how have you done it, where did you do it? The technical part of your job, the how-to part of your role.
Yeah. And a good thing to be able to get those questions, like clients interviewing, you've got technical and then behavioral. So with the behavioral questions, you don't just want to ask like yes or no questions. Like, you want to be quite specific with that. So instead of just saying like, tell me a little bit about yourself, obviously there is a place for that. But then something that's a little bit more structured could be, if they are in a leadership role or a project management role, can you describe a time where you had to deal with an upset customer and how did you handle it?
Yep.
It's an open-ended question, but you're making sure that you're getting the right answer that you're looking for. Especially if this person needs to be like if they need those soft skills like problem solving, communication, stakeholder engagement, that sort of space. So you really need to come up with standardized questions because you want to give everybody the same opportunity that you're interviewing. To have the same answer.
Yeah, so that you can
to have the
compare
same questions.
so you can compare the answers that are coming back.
Yeah.
We've also had in the past, and I always ask this when I'm setting an interview, is there anything specific you would want a candidate to prepare? And that probably comes in both technical and behavioral. But on the behavioral side, what's always really beneficial is if this is not a brand new position and you've had somebody in this role and there might have been a reason that the person didn't work out, or if you look at the time that the previous person was in the role, maybe some gaps, specifically ask about those areas in the interview of new candidates.
Yeah.
So that you can address what you know was lacking in the previous role. Maybe you didn't realize that the role had so much stakeholder engagement involved with it. Well, by not asking the question, you're actually not testing the one thing that's really important in that position. So look at the role that maybe is a role that you're replacing. If it's a brand new position, look at who the person will be engaging with, measure in terms of the who they'll be mentoring, who they'll be leading.
Yeah.
And you can ask the behavioral questions or formulate behavioral questions around that.
Yeah. And around the key competencies and the responsibilities as well, there's no use going to an interview and not touching on those sorts of things. And it can happen. You can get, I know I get sidetracked all the time. And I'm like, okay, like we've got to get back. Let's focus. So it can happen, especially if you are, I don't know, vibing with that person, you tangent. Everyone does it. So I think knowing, like having a clear structure put in place. And usually when you go to an interview nowadays, it's more one or two people.
Yeah.
It's more like a panel than just like a one-on-one. You will definitely you will have a one-on-one in the screening process, but in terms of the interview, it will be very structured. So I think clients, they do need to sit down with their panel and make sure everyone's on the same page as well, with what they're asking. But also how they're scoring, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
So that also needs to be quite standardized as well, just so you alleviate any bias.
Yep.
Too. So it can be a little tricky. So ensuring that you're all with the criteria, the scoring, no bias, asking the same questions for every candidate. But also I think it's important to try to take notes in an interview as well, so you know exactly what they said. So you're not trying to remember it, especially if you had 5 interviews that day. You're not going to remember what the first person said.
No. Yeah, and sometimes it's good to have just a break if you're doing back-to-back interviews, just to give yourself a break between the first and the second and the second and the third, just to regroup, quickly have a chat as a group if there's a group interviewing, and maybe having like a score out of 5 that you all agree on and say this is the score based on this experience that we've just had with the person. It's not, I don't think interviewing is a absolute black and white and this is exactly how it works, because you're working with people, and sometimes somebody walks in the room and you just get a feeling of, yes, you're our kind of people, or the answers is not exactly what we're looking for, it's just not landing.
You may need to delve deeper as well. So I think too, you can't be so structured that you're not able to deep dive further if you need to, or if they say something that sparks interest that could be good for the job, you want to be able to ask more about that as well.
Correct. And if the person was not submitted by an agency like us, we would usually in our candidate submissions to clients, we tell them a little bit about a background and who this person is as the package deal that we've spoken about. If you don't have that, if you've advertised directly as an organization and you're speaking to people the first time, find out, where do you live? What does that look like? We're based in the city. Is that a good location for you? We're based on the north side of Brisbane. We're based in the Sunshine Coast. We've had so many guys apply for roles in the Sunshine Coast, and then when you talk to them, they're like, oh no, I didn't realize you have to be based on the Sunshine Coast. Could I not do this role remotely? No, you can't.
Read
you
that.
have to be based on the Sunshine Coast. So rather find that out in the very first telephone call,
Yeah.
or I found the perfect candidate, and then down the track realize, it's not going to be, location doesn't work. So there's
Yeah.
a few things that are non-negotiable. Location, the way that you engage, if there's a work remotely option, or working arrangements that you can work in the office a few days. Is there specific days you need people to be in the office? We've got clients that have Tuesdays, everybody, the whole team is in the office. That's non-negotiable. So things like that, that's non-negotiable. Get those out of the way, and that's going to either rule somebody in or rule them out, unfortunately, but that's a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
People applying from interstate, and like, no, I can do this job remotely. Well, no, it's not a remote job. It's you have to be in the office job.
Yeah. Or you get people who are still living in Sydney or Melbourne and they're like, I'm actually moving to Brisbane.
Correct.
So it's kind of a catch-22, I guess, because you can spend all of your time with people who have Sydney or Melbourne and they're like, yeah, I'll move. But then sometimes they don't. So it is trying to find that fine line as well, without wasting your time, but also making sure that you're not missing out on an opportunity.
A really
too.
good candidate. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the feedback after the interview, really important. This is a difficult one to assume, but we usually assume that if the candidate wasn't interviewed, that we won't get a good, solid feedback as to why the person wasn't suitable. We still want to have feedback if we've just submitted a resume for the candidate, but also for us to know that, maybe we should have focused a bit more on this area, which we didn't realize, or we didn't focus, and that just helps us tailor our search and make sure that we can get the right candidate.
Yeah.
So that's a two-pronged approach. But once a candidate's interviewed and they're not suitable, please give feedback. I'm not saying they didn't have the suitable skills. That's not feedback.
You interviewed them for a reason.
Yes. Yep. And even if the feedback is they didn't have the suitable skills at the level that we were looking for, or just a little bit more than a generic feedback, again, that helps us to make sure that we're getting the right candidates through to you. But it's also, we want candidates, once they've given their time to do an interview, to leave them in a position where they can go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Next time for another interview, I've now learned and I can do a better job. It might be the way that they answered a question or anything. I feel like it's empowering if you can give somebody feedback, even if it's, any feedback is constructive. Depends on how you deliver it. But please close that loop, because you just never know as a client, the next time you're recruiting for a position again, and that same candidate might actually then be suitable for the role and then decide not to apply based on the experience they had with you previously as an organization.
Correct. And you just missed out on a really good candidate.
Just missed out on a really good candidate. And it's not very difficult to close the loop with a candidate and just go, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate on this occasion. We weren't successful based on these reasons, but we'd love to stay in touch.
Yeah.
99.9% of people will say, absolutely, thank you. Please keep me on your database.
Yeah. 100%. I quickly just want to mention something, and it's all around like the cultural fit. And a lot of companies now they're hiring for, some of them hire for potential rather than the skills that they have at the moment, where you've got the flip side and they hire for the skills that they've got at the moment. I had a meeting this morning and there was something that really, again, like they hire for potential and then they train. Like you can't teach someone how to be a decent human, but you can teach someone skills. And then also for the client, another way to reframe that, I guess, if you feel like they may not be a good cultural fit, is how can this person, or can this person add a new perspective on what we're doing? So some people, they have a lot of skills in a certain area and this is just, I'm not saying this is the right or wrong answer, but sometimes people in the hiring positions may feel a little threatened. So it is, how can this person add a new perspective to our team? Or how can this person add in a new skill set to our team? So I think if that gets reframed a little bit, it does open the possibility up of just, they're not a great cultural fit. Well, why? Can they not add something different
Yeah.
that will also match the culture of the company as well? But yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, and that's probably then really understanding what you're hiring for and what the longer term
Yeah.
goal is or deliverables are and who this person would need to interact with.
Yeah.
We've had a client that we placed a candidate who was just technically brilliant, really, really brilliant at the technical side. People skills, not so much. We submitted the candidate. The role did need interaction with other teams, and it wasn't at a large scale. It wasn't a very small scale, which the candidate would have been fine for. As we placed the candidate, and as the company grew, that interaction became more and more and more. And that wasn't what the candidate wanted to do. And instead of losing the candidate, they repositioned this position.
Yeah.
And gave the candidate a more technically focused role with less interaction on the people side, because that's not really what they wanted. Yes, that was a little bit down the track, but they repositioned it because they didn't want to lose the talent that they had. So I think it's just thinking, and it's not always possible.
No.
Sometimes you just need an X to do an X job so you can get across the line with something.
Yeah.
But if it's a pivotal role, it might be worth just spending a bit more time
Yeah.
finding
Thinking
the right
outside of the box.
potential. Yes, correct. Finding the right potential.
100%.
And then if it's not right,
yeah.
make a decision and go, it's not right. That's it.
Yeah. I think it's
Sometimes
also
you know.
important to trust your gut
Yeah.
as well.
Hmm.
Yeah. But then you also, like within an interview, you don't want to show bias either, which there's a fine line
Yes.
between that, whether it's the right candidate or, you know, maybe they grew up in the same town or you know them or, yeah, something like that. So you need to make sure of bias.
Correct.
That's a big mistake that can happen.
Yeah.
As well. But also making snap judgments, I think, is also another one. And we've had many scenarios where a candidate has gone in and they've been so nervous or something like that. And I think it's quite daunting, especially the more junior people,
Yes.
how they're going into interviews. And this could be a pivotal moment in their career and they're going in and they're just so nervous that they wholeheartedly know that they can do the job, and we also do, but they just buckle under the interview pressure, which is really, it's frustrating for both, well, for all parties involved. But I think too, just having a little bit of grace could also go a long way. We put on a contractor with a client here, and I knew that she was a nervous person I could hear the shaking in her voice when I spoke to her on the phone. And then again, that was brought up, hey, I think she's quite a nervous person. So when they went into the interview, they did say, yeah, she was very nervous and you could tell. But they were able to see around that. And then also we confirmed in the reference checks, she is a nervous person, but she does
get the job done,
settle, and she does get the job done. So that was a nice placement, although she was nervous, but she could get the job done. But the client also had a little bit of grace around that. Because, you know, people do get nervous. I get nervous. It's human.
Correct.
So, yeah, trying not to make snap judgments based on that.
Yep. It's ruling in rather than ruling out. So, quick question, and we've had this in the past. When you interview as a client, you interview a candidate, and you come out of that interview and you go, perfect, exactly what we're looking for, spot on. And then they ring us and they say, we'd like to see another candidate just to compare. Yes.
It's so frustrating. Yeah, especially like where the market is too. Like obviously it depends who's in the market, but if they have ruled out, say if you submit 3 people, they only want to look at 1, but then they want us to produce more candidates, that again delays everything. Time is of the essence.
Yeah, and usually if that candidate is perfect for you,
They're
they are
perfect for
probably
someone else.
perfect for somebody else as well. And then it becomes a game of managing the candidate and keeping them interested. And immediately, if they know that it's being delayed, their thought is, well, okay, then I'm
What's
probably
wrong?
not the choice. So I'm going to start keeping my options open, even though I love the company, maybe they don't love me.
Yeah.
And even if we say, no, they loved you.
They're just waiting.
Yeah. So that's a very, very tricky one. And I know that it would be great to have comparisons, but the 3 candidates submitted, if you wanted comparison, then choose one other out of the 3 and interview 2.
Yeah.
Or
At
interview all 3.
similar time as well. You don't want to have one
Correct.
interview one week and then an interview the other week. So
Yeah.
again, it steps back into our very first episode of this year, making sure that your timelines are set. So
Correct.
if you know that you're going to be interviewing, you want to make sure that you have those blocks available either the same day or the next day. Because
Yes.
if you have them a week after another because somebody's on holidays, that
Difficult.
first person who may have been perfect, they got to wait a week. In that week, a lot can change in the market.
Correct.
They could
Yeah.
have other interviews. They could have been reference check. I think for a client, you need to assume, and we should never assume anything, but in this instance, you need to assume that they're interviewing at other places as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Yep.
time is of the essence with
Yep.
this. And again, going back to that psychological contract,
Correct.
if you interview, you're both like, yep, perfect, excellent, but we want to go back out to market to see. That's saying to the candidate, do they trust me? Do they not think that I can do it? So it puts doubt in their mind already.
Yep. Correct. So yeah, and we have that happen where
All the
client
time.
wants to see another candidate, which I can understand from the client side, but there are repercussions
Yeah.
if you make that decision.
Yeah, and you could miss out
Correct.
on the candidate, and then the candidate that you chose to put up against that candidate might not be the right one, and then we're back at square one again, and it's just a revolving door.
Correct.
Or a circle.
Correct.
Maybe not, maybe more like a hexagon. It's like
Yeah.
stop after
Ding,
stop
ding, ding.
after stop after stop.
Correct. 100%.
But
So I
yeah,
think for us interviewing, our thoughts on that, interviewing is not an exact science.
no.
It shouldn't be. You're dealing with candidates. You're dealing with people. So try and keep it as standardized to make sure that you can compare answers to the same questions.
Apples to apples, not apples to oranges.
Yes, but also treating each individual interviewee as an individual interviewee. So, and that's not easy. And interviewing from both sides takes time, preparation. There's a lot of investment. If you've got 3 panel members, that's 3 hiring managers or managers' time involved in maybe 3 hours of interview if you have 3 candidates. So get it as right as you can, and try and manage the process by asking candidates the right questions. If you ask a candidate the right question, they will give you the answer. Or if they don't, your radar should pick that up and go, that doesn't sound right to me. Then delve into the question to find out, qualify the candidates really. And candidates, if you've got 7 other interviews happening say that. Like,
Yeah.
I've been active in the market, there's other things happening for me, but I'm really interested in your role, and these are the reasons why.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
Yep.
And again, flip side, well, on both sides, candidate and clients, if you do need more clarification, ask.
Plus,
You don't
yes,
want to get to the end of an interview, that person leaves and they didn't get the job because you're like, well, they didn't answer it right. And it's like, well,
yes,
did they actually understand the question? So again, being quite mindful of how that question is
yeah,
coming across,
yeah,
and something that could make a question that could make sense for you, Suki, might not make 100% sense to me
correct.
as well.
Yes,
So,
yes,
um,
yep,
and then candidate, if you don't understand, clarify. Like,
yep,
you can clarify, or after you do answer it, you can just simply say, was this the answer you were looking for? Or did I answer this the way that you were in,
yes.
the way that you wanted, or that sort of thing.
Does
But
that answer your
yeah,
question? Yes, it does. Thank you. Move on. Because
yeah,
then if it's a yes, it does, then the candidate knows, okay, I've answered it.
yeah,
If it's a yes, it does, and you're actually not telling the truth, then you've done that candidate a disservice. Instead of
yeah,
saying it does to a point, if you could maybe expand a little bit on your change management experience specific to that
yeah,
project of work that you did, if they've misunderstood that or they didn't answer the whole question.
yeah.
Yeah, I
And
think that
yeah,
that's exploring all options with the candidate. And of course, if you have to keep asking and asking and
there's a
asking and
red
asking and
flag
asking,
there.
there's also a limit to it.
Yeah,
But if you can see that they're answering the question, but there's just an angle missing for you, and you can see from the resume, or they would have done that, just clarify.
yeah,
Say, well, you've answered 3/4 of it. The other part I'm looking for is this.
yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
remember, this is for both. You're talking to a human. Humans make mistakes. They get their words mixed up. Um, yeah, I think a little bit of grace can go a long way in certain instances,
mm,
not all.
yeah,
Um,
qualified grace.
exactly. Yeah. So I think too, and we're coming back to that word of intentional. You do need to be intentional about the questions that you ask, who you're interviewing, how you're interviewing, and then also be intentional about the feedback that you give the candidate. Because
So,
that feedback that you could give them, that's a great learning curve for them. And it could make or break their career depending on how you approach that as well. So, um, yeah, I think that's really important.
yep,
Be intentional.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's our interviewing,
101,
how
I
to
guess.
interview. That's not the answer to it, but that's the be aware
The
of
gist.
the gist of it, our experiences. All right.
Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Conversations That Connect.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends.
Connect with us on social media at Montague Group on LinkedIn and Facebook. And please feel free to drop us a line with any topics you would like us to discuss, and of course, any questions that you do have.
Until next time, guys, stay curious and stay connected.